Hi everyone, welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political news show. Although so much happens these days, I often wonder if we should make this show twice a week. If I have time in the future, that is something I will consider doing, but for now, this is the best I can do. I thought about updating you during the week, but the news cycle keeps changing, so I figured it wasn't worth making a show and then have it immediately go out of date. So here we are, it is Monday, March the 10th, and what's going on? So much happened last week. We have economic news, tariff news, news about the war in Ukraine, some news in Congress, as well as Trump's speech to Congress. Let's start with tariffs and the economy, and that is going to be our lead story for today. It was going to be the war in Ukraine again, but this overtook it. As for, I feel the most pressing story, as I said, is the economy. To my shock and horror, including the shock and horror of so many, President Trump went ahead with the planned tariffs on Canada and Mexico and additional tariffs on China. We're now at 25% on Canada, 25% on Mexico, and 20% on China. And some of the items have been rolled back. I'll explain that a bit later. As I have warned for a long time, including many economists and people in the news and politicians, this will lead to higher prices. How much higher remains to be seen, but I don't think consumers will like these higher prices, and I don't think they can take them, and I don't think businesses can afford to absorb all of them. Last week I told you the Atlanta Fed was predicting a 1.5% drop in GDP this quarter. This week the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, which I think is the same thing, revised it down to 2.8%. So the concerns are widening. Wholesale gas prices along with oil prices are falling. Last week, oil prices touched a multi-year low over fears that the U.S. economy is slowing down. Actually, I believe oil prices now, or at least at one point last week, were about as low as they were in March of 2021, or May of 2021. And usually, while lower oil prices means lower gas prices, and we all love lower gas prices, usually falling gas prices is a sign of an economy in crisis. I read an article in Market Watch this week, and there's a few others as well, and they're wondering if the White House is trying to cause a recession. It certainly seems that way. While I don't want to speculate too much, a recession would mean lower inflation, which I do believe is a better trade-off. A recession would also mean lower interest rates and lower energy prices, all things that the president wants. However, a poor economy heading into the 2026 midterms would mean a shellacking, and I highly doubt that even if we got a recession, which we wouldn't know for a couple of months anyway, we would recover in time for the midterms to have any meaningful impact on inflation. Even if we had a mild recession, because technically we did have a recession in 2022. It was brief, and it didn't really halt the rise in inflation. I am shocked that the White House still imposed these tariffs. As I hinted at earlier, there was some relief on certain products covered by the USMCA, but this is still a large plurality of items that are still being tariffed. Trump is now targeting Canadian lumber and milk. American milk is being tariffed at 241%. And while we have little to no tariffs in response, we don't really import a lot of milk from Canada to begin with. It's the lumber that I'm most concerned about. We use Canadian lumber to build our homes, and we desperately need more homes. Canada will also have a new prime minister soon, and as of the recording of this podcast, I do not know who that's going to be, but you will know the winner because it will most likely be announced the day before this is released, but the same day that this is recorded. Most likely it will be Mark Carney, a former central banker, and he is the Trudeau continuity candidate, and most of Trudeau's allies are backing him. The other challenger is Chrystia Freeland, the former finance minister. She's unlikely to win, but she still could. She's promising to bring change. Of course, she was a large part of the Trudeau government for several years, so I don't think there's going to be that much change either way. But that's her message. Next podcast, I'll talk more about what this new prime minister is going to do and eventually talk about the Canadian election, whatever it is called. Still, as I have said, Canada is in a weak spot because the governing party does not have a majority in the legislature, and the Conservatives, who are the opposition, are still overwhelmingly likely to sweep to power later this year. Whether it be Carney or Freeland, they aren't likely to be imposed for very long, so Trump can take advantage of the situation for at least a few weeks or maybe months longer. Back at home, there has been news in Congress about the tax cuts. According to NBC News, which cited the Congressional Budget Office, Republicans will not be able to meet their budget targets without cutting Medicare or Medicaid. This is something I've said multiple times over the last few shows. We cannot balance the budget without reforms to Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. So are they going to cut Medicaid? Normally I'd say yes, they would, because that's their go-to. but there are such thin majorities in the House and slightly bigger majority in the Senate that I do think many Republicans will balk at this proposal. Perhaps even the Speaker, Mike Johnson, whose home state of Louisiana is one of the highest beneficiaries of the Medicaid program. As for Trump's address to Congress, I will just admit I did not watch the whole thing. I watched about half of it. It was the longest speech in modern history, definitely going back to the 1960s. The speech was almost 100 minutes long, and it was very divisive on both sides. Let's start with the president. Multiple times the president slammed President Biden and his failures. Probably fair. And it was very rally-like, with Republicans chanting USA and Trump, Trump, Trump. Trump attacked transgender rights, diversity programs, and targeted Canada and Mexico and many other countries. And it looks like April 2nd is supposed to be where we get even more tariffs. And he said that we've been ripped off for decades by nearly every country on earth. I'm going to pause here for a quick moment. There is some truth to this, but also some falsehood. We have been used by a lot of other countries. For example, NATO does not give in as much as we get into it. Another example I think is stupid is this UN Security Council. There's no need to have one. The Council has veto power over resolutions passed by the United Nations. The members are, of the Security Council, China, Russia, France, the UK, and us. First of all, China and Russia are not the same countries as what they were when we gave it to them. Russia was the USSR, and the Republic of China, which is now Taiwan, it had membership, and then we handed it over to the communists, which was a big mistake. France was squashed by the Nazis. They should have never been given it. And Britain is not a superpower anymore. So that leaves just us. There are two good examples. I could get into what I believe about the United Nations. The short answer is I don't think the United Nations should exist. It's clearly not effective, but I don't think that we should leave the United Nations. I consider myself a pragmatic Remainer. I wish it didn't exist, but because it does exist, I think we should be a part of it. But anyway, I would rephrase what Trump is saying. We are, by most metrics, the strongest country on earth. And with power comes great responsibility, such as other countries relying on us more. And that's the situation that I would say we are in now. Could we make it better for us? Absolutely. But I think if we take too much of the responsibility away, we will also lose the power as well. As for Democrats, their behavior was also abhorrent. And it was like they were in middle school. Representative Greene was shouting at the beginning of the speech that Trump had no mandate, which is not entirely true. Trump does have a mandate because he was elected. Quick explainer, we've heard a lot about a mandate and who has a mandate to govern. It's very political science speak for authority to govern. So, for example, people will in politics will talk about having a mandate of the people. Usually that means you have a big support from the electorate. And if you're a dictator, like Maduro, you don't have a mandate. And usually leaders, elected or not, that don't have a mandate are very weak, politically speaking. So, for example, Obama was the last president that I would say really had a mandate. He won a huge majority in the Electoral College in 2008, and Democrats were They were voted up and down the ballot in 2008. Obama 2012, I would say that was not a mandate. Trump 2016, definitely not, because he didn't win the popular vote. Biden, no. I mean, it was a little bit better, but no. And this time around, I would say no, because the Republicans lost some seats in the House. They did not win an overwhelming majority of the country's support. Anyway, so was this outburst really that terrible? Personally, I think it is, but let's go back to September 2009. I was a little boy then, but this was big news at the time. Take it away, President Obama.
There are also those who claim that our reform efforts would ensure illegal immigrants. This, too, is false. The reforms I'm proposing would not apply to those who are here illegally. It's not true. And one more misunderstanding I want to clear up. Under our plan, no federal dollars will be used to fund abortions, and federal conscience laws will remain in place.
In case you did not hear it, Representative Joe Wilson of South Carolina yelled, "You lie," to President Obama. And then I'll have to put the clip in the description because Speaker Pelosi's face was hilarious. Then fast forward, let's go to March 2022, when our glorious former leader, President Biden, was giving his first State of the Union.
And they come home. Many of the world's fittest and best trained warriors in the world. Never the same. Headaches, numbness, dizziness. A cancer that would put them in a flag-draped coffin. I know. One of those soldiers was my son, Major Bobert. I don't know for sure if the burn pit that he lived near, that his hooch was near, in Iraq and earlier than that in Kosovo, is the cause of his brain cancer, the disease of so many other troops.
In case you didn't hear that, that was Biden talking about his son Bo, which he does like all the time. And she yelled, "You put them in," Representative Bobert. You put them in, 13 of them, referring to the 13 Americans that died in Afghanistan during that disastrous withdrawal 3.5 years ago. Fast forward to 2023. This is another example.
Some of my Republican friends want to take the economy hostage. I get it, unless I agree to their economic plans. All of you at home should know what those plans are. Instead of making the wealthy pay their fair share, some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority. Let me give you, anybody who doubts it, contact my office. I'll give you a copy of the proposal. That means Congress doesn't vote. Well, I'm glad to see you. No, I tell you, I enjoy conversion. You know, it means if Congress doesn't keep the programs the way they are, they go away. Other Republicans say, I'm not saying it's a majority of you. I don't even think it's even a significant, but it's being proposed by individuals. I'm not politely not naming them, but it's being proposed by some of you. Look, folks, the idea is that we're not going to be moved into being threatened to default on the debt if we don't respond. Folks.
This one you kind of need to see it, but Marjorie Taylor Greene yelled liar to Biden when he was talking about the sunset of Social Security, which Republicans strongly oppose, including now President Trump. There was a time in the not-too-distant past where yelling during a speech by the president was taboo. It was like, whoa, it was a big deal. Now it is the norm, and I would expect this to happen in almost every speech from here on out. Wilson was censored by the Democratic majority at the time. Republican leadership has never supported a censure of their own member that when their member yelled at the president. Democratic leadership did not punish Al Green either, so I'm not gonna say Democrats have the moral high ground here. Instead, Democrats actually, when he was censored, they started doing the song from the Civil Rights Movement, because Al Green is an old-ass man with a ponytail. They started yelling, singing "We Shall Overcome" on the House floor. In case you're wondering what is a censure, I had to look this up myself. It doesn't really do much. It's basically a rebuke. It would be like if your mom yells at you but doesn't give you a punishment. It might have political consequences back home, but usually representatives that do this are all in safe districts, and all of them, including Wilson, who did this 15 years ago, are still in office today. As for the rest of the address, Democrats didn't stand almost the entire time, even when Trump was praising a 13-year-old who survived brain cancer. This is absolutely despicable, and I want to make a podcast about what Democrats should be using this time for, and this is not it. They need to separate the political stuff from the kids with cancer. As Joe Biden would say, come on, man. If they want to look like a credible opposition to Donald Trump in the midterms and in 2028, they need to start acting like one. The only time they clapped was when Trump said billions of dollars had been sent to Ukraine and that the war could go on for another 5 years. He said, "Do you want the war to keep going?" And they clapped. Democrats applauded it. Absolutely horrible. They also had stupid paddles that said "Musk steals" and "false" in signs of protest. It just made them look childish and stupid. In a CNN poll, 7 out of 10 watchers had a positive reaction. 44% had a very positive one. Lower than Trump in 2017 and lower than Biden in 2021. Also notable, I just want to say, the CNN poll of viewers had 14% more Republicans than the general public. because obviously if it's a Republican speech, usually Republicans will tune in more to it, and I would say the same is true for a Democrat. CBS found that 76% of Americans supported Trump's speech. And I'll give you the caveat later. 71% said they were inspired, 68% said they were hopeful, 54% said they were proud, 27% said they were worried, and 16% said they were angry. Although, as I said, this has a Republican skew. 51% of the sample were Republicans, and in case you don't know, 51% of the country are not Republicans. 27% are independent, and 20% are Democrats. I believe the number is really more like 40% Republicans, 35% Democrats, maybe the other way around, but the rest is independents. So not a real representative sample of the country. But then again, a representative sample of the country didn't watch the debate or watch the speech. President Trump's approval in general remains around 49%, with his disapproval at about 48%. There isn't much data about the midterms, so we'll have to wait and see. But almost all polls for the race for Virginia governor, which is an election that will happen later this year, is tied or the Democrat is narrowly ahead. In New Jersey, which is also electing a governor, there's no easy polling I could find, but if Democrats are in the ascendancy nationally, they should easily win these elections. In New Jersey, at least 12 points, 15 ideally. In Virginia, it should be at least by 10, 12 ideally. If they're to underperform or Republicans win either of these, if Republicans win both, which is very unlikely, that would be the canary in the coal mine for Democrats in the midterms. That would be very, very, very bad. So they have to win these both. Anyway, enough about that. Lastly, Ukraine. It was starting to appear at the end of last episode, and now I think it's very clear. Europe is going to take a lead on defending Ukraine, and I think this is fantastic, and this is what I wanted really for the last 2.5 years. That being said, they aren't going to try to stop getting us involved, but Trump has clearly stated that he wants a public apology from the president of Ukraine before he considers the minerals deal again. Even though I consider that what happened in the Oval Office to be a setup, Zelensky was not exactly innocent either. He never said thank you for all that we've done for him, and he actually had an argument with former President Biden back in 2022 when Biden told him that we were going to send him $1 billion in aid, and Zelensky said he wanted more. Of course, this is according to news reports, but I absolutely believe this happened because it sounds like Zelensky. It's like when Biden talks about his son, Beau. It's like, all right, if you hear that in a story, then yeah, you know that story happened. UK PM Starmer and French President Macron's coalition of the willing is now more necessary for Ukraine than ever because the Trump administration has frozen all military aid to Ukraine as well as cutting off intelligence sharing, which we've been doing the last few years. And this seems to be an attempt to strangle Ukraine and force it to accept a peace deal. Will it work? I don't know. I would think so. But then again, Biden 3 years ago was beating his drum saying that sanctions were going to work when they didn't. To be clear, why didn't they work? For the most part, Russia went around them by using its allies in East Asia. Russia still sells oil in the international market by passing Europe's price cap. In fact, Europe still mostly buys Russian oil, so Europe is still funding the war that they claim to be against. Just saying. Then, as for Russia, Trump's stances are even more confused. He said he couldn't believe that Russia would take advantage of the Oval Office blowup, as if Putin wouldn't ever see it, he would just never encounter it, even though everybody else on Earth saw it, and said that Russia should end the war or there will be more sanctions. But on the other hand, Trump said that's exactly what he would have done in the same situation. So which is it, Don? Putin is taking advantage of Ukraine and shouldn't have done it? Or he should do the right thing? Oh, I should explain what Putin did. Putin sent more missiles into Ukraine, so taking out another town. So that's what he did. So Trump said he can't believe that Russia took advantage of him and then said that he would have done the same thing. And then I found this online. I don't know how accurate this is, but according to the Kiev Independent, they write that President Zelensky's approval in Ukraine is at 68%, which is very high, at least by American standards. So if Putin and Trump are trying to force Zelensky out, it doesn't seem to be working. And Elon Musk, by the way, a couple weeks ago said that Zelensky would lose an election in a landslide, which doesn't seem to be the case. So where do I see the war going from here? Well, if you'd asked me a year or two ago, I would have said it would likely freeze, similar to the Korean War. Now I'm not so sure. I think there will eventually be a ceasefire, because you can't fight forever, but at some point there needs to be a stop to hostilities. To the short answer is I have no clue, and I'm not Nostradamus, unfortunately. So anyway, that is all that we have for this week. Thank you for tuning in. I will get back to you next week. I'm sure even more will have happened by then. So have a good one. Bye-bye.